I am getting to that stage in life where I can start counting lots of years in my life as a minister in service. Not quite as many as my dear friend John over here, but I have at least had 6 congregations of which I have been ministered to, and also alongside of that I have had maybe 7 or 8 congregations. I can't count, John, it's getting that long. And a couple of times, one working for Churches of Christ in their head office, and then working for the Uniting Church not that long before I started here. I have to say, sometimes I think to myself, what do you say to a congregation when you know them and when you're very familiar with them? It's odious to make comparisons. We shouldn't make comparisons because, in my experience, every congregation is different. But if this was my last word to you, my last sermon, what I would want to say is thank you for who you are. This is truly a unique and wonderful congregation. It is filled with such diversity. Some people who were born here and lived here all of their life. Some of us, like myself, have come later to this place. But we found ourselves in this place called Springvale, and we are a community of believers who share together. And so it's very rare that you sit and say thank you to a congregation in public, but I want to say thank you to you, because if this was my last service, that's what I would truly want to say. Thank you for who you are. I think there is an amazing amount of love in this church, an amazing amount of work that goes on in this church, and people who work behind the scenes. There's a great humility in this congregation. And so truly, you are special. Know that I will always hold you dearly in my heart in these things. And so today, I want to bring a service to you and talk to you a little bit about things that are dealing with the old world 2,000 years ago, but very much are dealing with today's world. Today's world where we're confronted often by the things that are on our news. I was totally confronted by the scenes from Europe this week of refugees who wanted to get out of Syria and make their way to a safe place. Did any of you see some of that footage? It was horrific, truly. And you have to say, where is humanity when you see this type of thing happening? The sadness is it's not unique in human situations. It's a reality for many people who need to flee one place and go to another. Even within my own family, my wife's family, at the end of the war were forced to leave their home and walk in what was called in German the Flucht, or the flight, where they had to flee from certain parts of what had been East Germany back to central Germany. A terrible time in winter when things were hard, there was no food, there was no support available, but forced to do this. And for right or wrong of wars, for right or wrong of the conflicts that we have in our world, it is so often innocent people who are caught up in all of this. The sad thing that really gets to my heart is the arguments that the politicians are having about this, about borders and securities, which ring a little true to our own country, don't they? Even in this country, there has been a huge debate in my time in this church over the issues of border and security. Who should... Oh, goodness.
That's better.
The power has come. Praise God, hallelujah. The issue of border security has been one that has been discussed and discussed time in and time out in this country. And some of us will have voted one way or another because of those very debates. But let us think of the human cost of all of this. This is not about countries, it's not about sovereignty, it's about people and God's love for people. Today I want to focus on the one story, which is the story of a lady called simply the Syro-Phoenician woman. This woman that comes to Jesus, and the only argument that Jesus ever loses in the gospel is this argument. And it revolves around bread and crumbs from the table. And I resonated with this as I was reading it through the week, as I was thinking about it, and watching these images of people who literally are getting the crumbs from our tables, in their poverty, in their homelessness, in their flight from the terror. And then it seems to me, as I study and read the scriptures, that Jesus wasn't too affected by borders. Today we see him in a place called Tyre, which is one of the lands outside of the promised land, outside of the holy place. He has gone over the border into a different area. And in doing so, he is confronted by a woman. Now, we don't think too much of that. I shake hands and sometimes even greet quite warmly you as women who are in this church. I hope not too warmly, but we'll go on with, we'll worry about that a bit later. But, you know, there is a sense that there is no barrier between us. In this culture at this time, as in many cultures that are here even to this day, for a man and woman to just approach each other so casually is not done. A second time, Jesus breaks a border, a division, in talking to this woman. Rabbis do not speak to women like this. In fact, she was a loser on 3 times. And they had a certain prayer in Judea at this time. God, I thank you that I am not a woman, a Gentile, or a dog. This is where women stood on the pecking order, and she was outside, more of an outsider you couldn't find. Yet Jesus was prepared to break the taboos of the community at that time and to start to talk to this woman and become involved in this very complex and deeply theological argument. I've studied theology for many years. I did 14 years of theological study. You'd think I'd get it right after 14 years, wouldn't you? But after 14 years, one thing I know is theology can be argued and argued and argued about. It's really interesting on some of the arguments that you can get. Today we will later celebrate in communion. The church has split itself over communion theologically time and time again. That's one of the reasons why the Catholics and the Protestants have had such a split over a long time, yeah? You couldn't, if you were a Protestant, you couldn't go into a Catholic church and take communion. Well, goodness me, all hellfire and damnation might come upon you should you do so. And likewise, and even today as I talk to people, there is still a remnant of that amongst some of my Catholic friends who see us as a little bit different, a little bit strange, because of these deep theological arguments that we cause to separate ourselves. And it's interesting, in today's church, the things that we allow to separate us. True? Yeah? We have been separated on a number of things. The gender war, that has separated us. Yeah? True, Mary?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Have we got any further?
Not a lot.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say that, but I'm a man, so I don't have the right to say that. In terms of the embracing of culture has been a very difficult one, and it's one area I think the Uniting Church has truly tried to show its colours, literally, by the embracing of different cultures. But for many of our churches, that's not the done thing. In some of my Baptist friends' churches, they have found it very difficult to give away what is a white, Anglo-Saxon, Western model of church, that people have to adapt to that. And I look around this congregation and I think, what a wonderful opportunity we've had to be a very multicultural church. And I think, and I will clearly pin my colours to the mast, I think we are a much better church for the diversity that is here, for the acceptance of the very different cultures that we touched upon, yeah? Well, I hope you think that. I'm taking you thinking because you still come to the church. That doesn't mean to say that we value our own culture any less. one thing I do realise is no matter how much I try to divorce myself from my history and past and my culture, it's very difficult to do so. And nor should I. I should treasure that which I have. But that doesn't mean to say I should hold it over and against other cultures from other places. Jesus shows that he isn't prepared to let his Jewish culture be infracted upon by this strange woman who wants to have a theological argument. So what I want to say here today is sometimes it's good to lose the cultural argument, to lose the theological argument, in order that lives can be restored and brought into fullness. And I don't think that happens too much in the world that I see. Interestingly enough, I was in the city this week. Well, actually, to be 100% precise, I was in Carlton. I love Carlton. I started my first working life in Carlton. I worked in an advertising agency as what was grandly called a production assistant. I need to let you know what a production assistant does because it sounds really good. But basically what it did was I used to have to run copy down to the newspapers, and I used to have to run tapes down to 3AW and 3DB and all of the radio stations were there at the time. But even more, my best job was to make coffee and to get the lunch for everyone. So it sounds very grandiose, it wasn't. But I loved Carlton because it was one of those areas that was such a mix of culture. So being there this week was really exciting. I went into my favourite shop. My favourite shop in Carlton is a bookshop called Readings. Do you remember bookshops? Yeah? They're rapidly disappeared, haven't they? I love bookshops and I like spending time in bookshops. My favourite area is the cultural studies and the philosophy area. Now that sounds very grandiose, but I was really interested that I went into the philosophy area, and most of the philosophy was about the thought of Western culture and the decline of Christian thinking. I was amazed at how many books were there that were dealing with the Christian question, which I thought was quite interesting because if I'd have gone there maybe 10 years ago, and as I did go there 10 years ago, most of the dealing was with the multicultural question. And you had writers like Edward Said, you had writers like Derrida, you had Jabez, you had a whole lot of philosophers that were really trying to break open what we call the post-colonial question, what it was to be a post-colonial society. And some of you here come from those post-colonial countries. Those of you from Cambodia, the French influence was very strong on you, wasn't it? Yeah. You know, they tell me that there are certain places that are more French than in France, in certain architectural styles in Cambodia. I don't know, I've never been there. Maybe you can enlighten me. But some of you are from Africa, where you had different cultures upon you. I know that the English sort of weaseled their way into Sudan somewhere. Sri Lankans, I think you had a few of the Poms as well, didn't you? And you had a bit of a Dutch influence as well. True? Yeah? Gee, I'm doing pretty well here. I've studied my history. And us Australians were never touched by a colonial culture, were we? In fact, we're so proud of ours, we put ours into a little corner in the side of our flag. Did you notice that the New Zealanders were changing their, or are talking of changing their flag? I wonder if the sun will still come up tomorrow. I think they got fed up with having their flag picked as our flag. Yeah? It's so similar to the Australian flag. Now, I don't want to make big statements about flags and culture other than the fact that too often we let those things get in the way. And I am really interested that the current debate is how we live as a post-Christian Western society. In America especially, which was such a strong Christian nation, we're starting to see that decline and go. And the reality for each one of us that sit here in this room today is that we have to deal with that question. But we can deal with that question, but is that really the important question? And as I sat and I watched those migrants trying to flee Syria and the Middle East, and I thought about my own church here, where some of you tried to flee Pol Pot, some of you tried to flee from Sudan and the issues that happened and the birth of South Sudan. And some of us who simply have to deal with our own Western history of what does it mean to be Australians now that England is no longer the great mother country that we used to see it. They are questions, but as I looked at those people trying to go from one place to another, I saw simply this: people, young children, women, men, old men, young men, trying to flee and escape the tyranny that was there. And I did think to myself, if Jesus is prepared to knock a few barriers over, to pass through a few cultural imperatives, what right do we have to hold on to those things? But then finally I wanted to turn it back on it itself. And many of us have been the recipients of the grace of this country. We have come to this country and we have received much. It is a country that by and large is free from the violence that Europe is and the Middle East, isn't it? Some of us have come here to see a better life, and I don't know, but I certainly do think I've had a better life for living here. It's a question for you to ask yourself. But now I ask, what are we required to do? Because in many respects, Jesus in this place was the foreigner, was the other, was the thing of difference. He was not in his own territory. And yet he turned around and served those that were around him. And as people, some of us who've come and been privileged to hear, what do we give back in return to this wonderful place? Who are the disenfranchised? And as I see the unemployed, as I see the people who struggle to get work, struggle to get meaning, I live very much in a working class suburb with working class people, many of whom haven't known employment, many of whom have come from good Anglo-Saxon stock with all the privilege, yet somehow have ended up on the bottom rung. And I'm asking, if we start to turn the tables once again, because Jesus constantly turns the tables, time and time again. And yeah, we might be successful, we might have a good life, but then what is our responsibility back to the people that we are confronting? The poor, the homeless, the ones who are on the bottom rung of our society. I guess there are millions of ways to answer that, but I think the important thing is to not win the argument or have all the answers. Because in today's little story, that first story of the Syrophoenician woman, it wasn't the answer that was really being sought for. It was to hold the question and allow the question itself to speak. I hope we as a congregation can allow sometimes not to just have the answers, but to have the questions speak to us, to open our eyes and enlighten us in different ways. The second story I won't go into in any great depth. But it's interesting, after this discussion happens, there is a great opening of the deaf ears. Maybe there's an analogy in that as we deal with this small story, in some ways the hands of Jesus touch our ears and they are open to hear for the first time. What an incredible story we participate in today. So many layers, so many things that we can take away. Unfortunately, we live in a very cynical society and a cynical world. But let our ears be open. Let us not just win arguments. Let us not just see divisions, but let us be enabled to live the gospel in all that we do. We are going to have the opportunity of singing again, and probably one of my favourite songs because it's so hard, but we are going to sing Tulumina. We're going to do it without music as well. Can we cope with that? Oh, you're not sure?